Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We will be covering Canada Cannabis Advertising Compliance and a Ask Me Anything session with Segev LLP out of Canada, our wonderful partners from Canada who are an amazing legal team operating in Canada and helping our industry tremendously. With that, let's go ahead and move right along into our webinar today. A quick introduction on myself. My name is Eduardo Silva. I am the VP of Sales here with Foot Traffic. I will be your host for today. And a little bit about Foot Traffic. If you don't already know, we are the leaders in cannabis dispensary and delivery digital marketing, both in the United States and Canada. We have, at any given point, run digital marketing campaigns for 200 plus dispensaries throughout all of the states in the United States as well as Canada. And we're really, really happy that you've taken the time to join us today. For our presentation today, our partners, Segev LLP, will be joining us here. And I'm going to turn it over to the team to introduce themselves. Alon, if you wouldn't mind, perhaps just give us a little bit of an introduction on yourself and your firm out of Canada.
Yeah, thanks for that quick intro. This is Alon Segev speaking. Segev LLP is based out of Vancouver, British Columbia. We've got an office in the US as well and an office in Beijing, China. We are a full-service business law firm with a specialty in cannabis law. Cannabis law is fairly broad in the sense that we are more than just specializing in how to comply with the regulations. We assist our clients with all manners of their business. So anything from lease issues, employment issues, supply issues, litigation, and then more pointed, how to operate your cannabis business in a lawful manner, and how to market and promote your business lawfully in compliance with the Cannabis Act. And we've got experience assisting clients in the cannabis industry. We're talking retailers, licensed producers, cultivators, marketing companies. So we've got a fairly in-depth body of experience in the industry, which allows us to focus on, which allows us to really spot most of the issues that you as professionals in the industry will likely encounter. I'll turn this over to my colleague, Stefan Cruz, who works with me assisting cannabis clients as well.
Yeah, thanks, Alon. This is Stefan here. I am a lawyer with Segev in Vancouver here. I don't have a whole lot to add. Alon gave a great summary of the firm, and that pretty much captures my practice as well. I'm a business lawyer in general and a cannabis lawyer in specific. I've done a fair bit of cannabis and M&A, mergers and acquisitions. I do cannabis regulatory law and also advise on advertising issues.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you both very, very much for taking the time out of your day to help us with this webinar and address some wonderful questions that our attendees have submitted prior to the webinar. So everybody on the line does follow along. We will be covering numerous questions that have already been pre-submitted. However, in order to become a little bit more familiar with the Zoom interface as well as our Q&A feature, please take a moment to just navigate to the top of your screen where you will see a Q&A button. We do have moderators for our webinar here today that will be helping manage those questions as well throughout the webinar. So Despite having several questions already pre-submitted, which we will be covering here momentarily, we will also like to hear from you who have, gratefully bestowed us with your time today to attend and perhaps have some live questions as well and or clarifications that you would like. The webinar today will be approximately 50 minutes long, and we will be recording this webinar, which will be hosted on our website after it is complete here. So later today will be posted. Feel free to share this with anybody else in the industry whom you feel could benefit from some of the legal advice here that you will be witnessing today. So with that being said, Alon and Stefan, thank you once again for taking the time to join us today and to help our industry, if you will, with some of these questions that they have submitted. So let's get started with the overlying question here pertaining to the Canadian legal cannabis industry itself and the regulations. So what are some of the regulations that dispensaries need to abide by in Canada, Alon and Stefan?
Yeah, so the legislation that is most relevant to non-medical cannabis is the Cannabis Act. It's a federal piece of legislation that is applicable to all provinces. And then in addition to that, each province has its own provincial legislation governing the retail sale of non-medical cannabis, which also includes how to operate the stores, how to market, how to promote, including digital marketing as well. So that's sort of the main piece of legislation. And in addition to that body of legislation, we've got other legislation that will definitely impact your ability and your methods of carrying on business. You've got the Canada anti-spam legislation that deals with electronic communications. It's often known as CASL. And then we've got the Criminal Code of Canada as well that deals with unlawful use and sale of narcotics. And then we've got privacy legislation, both provincial legislation, which differs from province to province, albeit they're often very similar in nature. And then you've got a federal privacy legislation as well. It might not be apparent how this comes into play, but it does when you're collecting customer data. And often customer data is a very, very valuable asset for any business, but there are regulations on how to collect the data, how to store it, and how to disseminate it.
Wonderful. That is definitely great to know. There are several. So if we were to summarize that, Alon, it sounds like there are a handful of regulations that our attendees here and the industry as a broad spectrum, if you will, have to pay attention to. That is both in how they attain the customer information, how they communicate with the customer, as well as how they market to their customers, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. If you're collecting personally identifiable information, then you really do fall under the legislation. And there are quite a number of pitfalls that you need to be mindful of to stick handle. Stefan mentioned that we also deal with mergers and acquisitions in the space. People are buying and selling dispensaries. Up until very recently, those were very lucrative. The asset that was being sold were development permits and sort of the location of the dispensary as well, but to a large extent, they were customer lists. And a dispensary with 40,000 names is extremely valuable. So how do you go about selling that information falls within the jurisdiction of those privacy legislations.
Wonderful, wonderful. So to all of our attendees today, and to the attendees that will be watching this afterwards. Pay close attention to your compliancy, right, when attaining customer information, because this can be of tremendous value to your overall equity of your business as you do, you know, work towards, if you will, a acquisition or a sale of your business. So moving right along here, what does the Cannabis Act say about digital marketing? Great question.
Stefan, do you want to grab this one?
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah. The Cannabis Act doesn't really, and Alon, feel free to jump in here, it doesn't really discriminate between digital marketing and other forms of marketing. So the Cannabis Act does have some things to say about marketing in general, but it doesn't really discriminate between different forms of marketing, digital, you know, print media, other types of advertising that you can imagine.
Yeah, that's right. You can advertise digitally as long as you're in compliance with the Act.
Exactly.
Perfect. Perfect. All right, so our next question here, what marketing is and isn't allowed under the Cannabis Act?
So, Stefan, I'll let you jump into this one as well.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. That's a fairly broad question as well, and I don't want to just read out the Cannabis Act for you. But, basically, the Cannabis Act starts by listing things that are prohibited types of activities, and then carves out some exceptions to those prohibitions. So obviously, you can't communicate or advertise in a manner that's appealing to youth. So you know, things like cartoons and things that appeal to youth are not allowed. You can't actually, in general, advertise the price or information about distribution of cannabis. You cannot use testimonials or endorsements. You cannot depict people or characters or animals, whether real or fictional. So no Tony the Tigers. Let's see. You cannot advertise cannabis in a manner that appeals to a certain lifestyle. So things like Marlboro Man type, you know, use this product and live this great glamorous lifestyle. So that being said, within those those prohibitions, there are some types of promotions that are lawful, and basically the categories of those fall under three headings. You can provide information, factual information about your product, about your accessory that you're selling. You can provide point of sale promotion where you advertise the availability of a certain product or price. And you can provide brand preference promotion where you highlight brand characteristics or elements of your product or your service.
Perfect. Yeah, definitely a little bit more of a broad question, right, Stefan?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that some of the follow-up questions that we had here will definitely start getting a little bit more definitive, okay, where we'll be able to answer a little bit more in detail. So let's keep it moving. This is great information. So what punishments and fines can the government impose if, let's say, a dispensary is not abiding by some of these regulations?
Yeah, good question. I can hit that one. Under the Cannabis Act, there are some penalties that are explicitly set out. They fall under two categories, and these are criminal penalties. So in Canada, criminal offenses fall into two categories. The more serious ones are called indictable offenses. So for indictable offenses under the Cannabis Act, the government can levy fines of up to $5 million, or imprisonment of up to 3 years, or both. And for summary offenses, the less serious types, the government can levy fines of up to $250,000, or 6 months imprisonment, or both.
Neither of which sound really fun, right? In the end of the day. So we
No,
want to avoid
no.
that at all costs.
Yeah.
Great. And then I think you talked about this a little bit, Stefan, in the earlier question there, but maybe we can get into a little bit more of a description on this. So what imagery is restricted for use online in Canada?
Right, right. Good question. Yeah, imagery. I suppose certainly you cannot depict people, characters, or animals, and no imagery that appeals to children. So, you know, I mean, that's hard to pin down sometimes, what is directed at children and what might just be found to be appealing to children. But those are two types of things that are specifically prohibited. Advertising price,
when you look
I
at,
guess.
when
Go
you
ahead,
look
Lon.
at some more of the traditional marketing techniques, I often pull examples from, you know, you look at the Marlboro Man. That would not be permissible under the Cannabis Act because it evokes certain imagery of lifestyle and health. So any animal depictions are not permitted because they find that it's appealing to kids. Any imagery showing lifestyle, daring, adventure, it's fairly restrictive. If you look at the packaging of cannabis as well, the packaging of cannabis really speaks to it. They're always plain packaging with no imagery other than the marijuana leaf, indicating that it's a cannabis product. And even then, the packaging has restrictions as well. Like there's no windows on the packaging, so I can't see what's inside. It can't be shiny or metallic. So promoting product with the use of imagery is really similar. So how do you get around that? I mean, there are ways around it. You're now sort of brand building. So if you look at some dispensaries in Canada, they've done quite a nice job doing that, whether it be Tokyo Smoke. You go into their stores and they evoke a certain lifestyle without really hitting on those points. Or you look at Hobo, their stores are very distinct from other stores. So they are selling cannabis, but they do, through design, speak to certain lifestyle elements while still being in compliance with the Act.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think what I take away from this, right, when in doubt, I would certainly encourage, you know, the audience here to engage Segev Group and just, you know, make sure that some of these broader definitions of imagery, right, are not stepping on landmines for you down the line. So that would be my encouragement for you there. Thank you guys for that answer. And moving right along here. So are we allowed to show a logo that looks similar to a cannabis leaf in our online ads? It kind of, you know, bridges right into the last conversation.
Yeah, I don't see why not.
Mm-hmm.
You can. I mean, the short answer is you can, as long as you're not mixing it with one of the restrictions. So if it's being held by a koala bear, you can't. To strike a point home. So yeah, as long as you're in compliance with the Act, by not combining that with one of the restrictions, you should be good.
Wonderful. Thank you for the definition, as well as the very clear example, right? No imagery for that potentially could be misconstrued as advertising to children, right? Very important there. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, for that matter, it's not just, you know, we're focusing a lot on kids because that's an easy one to distinguish, but also health benefits. So if you're using, you know, a little old lady in a wheelchair holding a cannabis leaf and she's smiling, that wouldn't fly as well. So there are more subtle restrictions. because that would convey some sort of health benefit.
Gotcha, gotcha. Stefan, anything you wanted to add there?
I could add, I guess, you could certainly use a leaf in your promotions, but you could not use it in a way that implies like a testimonial or an endorsement. So it couldn't be being held by a celebrity. You can't have LeBron James holding your leaf, or even Snoop Dogg, even though we're certainly accustomed to seeing those types of images from elsewhere.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think there are some questions here that we are going to be engaging very momentarily that do address, the whole aspect of celebrity as well within the industry.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference between providing information and being promotional?
Right. So
another broad question.
Yeah. So providing information, you're focusing more on sort of the factual nature of the product or the service. So I can provide information regarding THC content and strain and sort of the terpene profile. That's fine. Promotional is going beyond the fact and it entering into more of a subjective realm. So if you're suddenly promoting the experience of the high, or promoting, again, harking back to lifestyle and some of these restrictive advertising techniques, that's not factual in nature. I can even advertise the price at the point of sale. That's factual. There's nothing wrong with advertising how much it costs. It's factual in nature. So I guess that's sort of the test. Is it objective? If it's objective and factual, you can advertise it. Is it subjective and not factual? In other words, my perception of the product might differ than your perception of the product, and it starts feeling like an opinion, then you're starting to enter into the promotional realm.
That's exactly it.
Great.
Yeah. Things like, terpene profiles or THC content, that's something that can be tested objectively. Things like, is it potent, or is it smooth, or is it enjoyable? Those are kinds of subjective, and that would be considered, offside.
Wonderful, wonderful. Here's a question pertaining to celebrity once again, right? We were chatting about this just moments ago. Can I pay a celebrity or influencer to promote my product? I think that's an easy one for us.
It is, yeah. No, the answer is no, you cannot. Not here in Canada. That type of testimonial or celebrity endorsement is not permitted.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's really black and white. There has been some creative ways around it. For example, Drake, with his partnership in Canopy Growth, he's now creating More Life Growth Company. So we've got a sort of an international superstar like Drake, who isn't directly promoting the product or the company, but the association with the company is likely enough to have sort of that star appeal. And that's fine. It's actually quite clever because you've got it, in the Financial Post and other newspapers and in online media. There's quite a lot of talk about Drake's involvement in Canopy and Drake's launching this new company called More Life Growth. So it's just by association. I suspect you might get more of that. I know Seth Rogen is launching his product line. So
that's right.
You can advertise by association, but you can't have celebrity like Snoop Dogg going on and on about how great the product is and the high and the experience. That would be offside.
Wonderful. And I think, gentlemen, this does answer our next one, which, puts it pretty plainly there, by association, right? As a celebrity, that becomes somewhat a byproduct. The influence, if you will, becomes a byproduct, right, of that association or partnership. So great question. How does Segev verify compliance?
Yeah, so this would be really on a case by case. If a client approaches us and says, you know, this is sort of what we want to do, some sort of promotional activity, we would review it, and if it passes the test, we green light it. If it doesn't, we don't just say it won't fly. We look at sort of the mechanic of the activity, and we offer suggestions by tweaking the promotion in a manner where it would comply. I mean, some things are just black and white. Like if someone came to me and says, I want to start a loyalty rewards program, I would tell them, you can't do it. It just doesn't work. So other items are much more fluid in nature, which we would work with the client hand in hand in putting together a strategy that complies with the legislation.
Perfect. All right, you guys touched on this in the beginning of our presentation here, but I think it's important to go into a little bit more depth, because I feel like the anti-spam law is definitely something that a lot of clients are always concerned with, right? How do I promote to my existing customers while remaining compliant? So if we could just take a stab at this one, what is Canada's anti-spam law? You know, maybe with a little bit more definition, I think this would be great.
Yeah, so CASL regulates a bunch of things. I'll just sort of list them off. It regulates the sending of commercial electronic messages, the alteration altering the transmission of data. It deals with installation of computer programs, but that's neither here nor there for us. Use of false or misleading representations online in promotion of products or services, collection of personal information through accessing a computer system, and collection of email addresses with the use of computer programs. So that's what it regulates. It's fairly broad. For our purposes, what we really are looking at is collecting customer email and then sending customers promotional emails or communication to customers to keep them abreast of, you know, the product that we've got. I understand that certain edibles are in short supply. Vapes hit the shelf and disappear within a day. So blasting out a message to your existing client base of a product arriving on the shelf is permissible, but you need consent of the customer prior to being able to include them on an email list. The method of obtaining consent is pretty explicit. They have to opt in. A customer has to opt in into receiving those commercial electronic messages. So they have to provide not implied consent, but express consent to receive those emails. And the way you can do it is at the point of sales terminal. If you have a first-time customer, when they're making a payment, you can have them opt in at the time. We've all seen it where you check a box on a POS terminal and you enter an email address, and that would be sufficient consent to then include them in a newsletter and send out emails. There are some examples of applied consent that I won't get into, but generally it's easy enough to get express consent just by asking people for their email address at the point of sale, and then you can add them to your list. That consent is good for a period of 2 years, and then it has to be renewed. You can send a customer an email prior to that 2-year expiry asking them if they wish to continue receiving those newsletters, and that email can be sent separately. And if they opt in, then you buy yourself another 2 years. what's important to be mindful of is what's important. There's certain best practices that you should be mindful of. One, keep evidence of all express consents. So you should have some sort of database confirming that express consent has been given. If you have implied consents, you want to make sure to convert those to express consents. So implied consent would be, for example, I reach out to a store asking for information, and that store sends me a newsletter. That would be implied consent. So when I respond to that customer, at that time, I would ask them, would you like to be included in our newsletter or promotional weekly mail out? And that would be converting implied consent to express consent. You should also track the expiry of those consents and avoid relying on oral consent. So if you've got a customer coming to a store and an associate says, hey, would you like to be updated on product as it arrives to the store, as it arrives in our store, and the customer gives verbal consent, yeah, that would be great. You need to train your staff to convert that verbal consent into a written express consent by filling in the required form, checking a box, providing an email address, that sort of stuff.
Very good explanation there. Thank you so much, Alon, for that. And I think this goes back to the earlier conversation we were having surrounding, you know, what to do with your customer, or what the value of the customer consent can be to your business, right? It is in many ways considered equity, right, as to the value of your business once you do look at potentially even selling it or going through an acquisition. And so ensuring that you do have documentation that states that the customer list that you have has consented to communication will certainly ensure that you're carrying forward that equity of your business.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, if you're looking at acquiring another business in the retail space, that would be part of the due diligence. The buyer's lawyer would be making sure that you guys are in compliance with that. The buyer's lawyer would make sure that the target or the selling business has complied with the privacy legislation and CASL legislation. So it's pretty important to have this stuff in check.
Absolutely. And, you know, one of the things that we also do for our customers, that is ensuring that they do acquire, you know, correct consent as well by having proper opt-in procedures in place, as well as carrying forward the documentation that that customer has consented to being communicated by your business. So very important there. So moving right along here, guys, thank you so much for that explanation. And does CASL apply to digital marketing?
Yeah, I mean, it does. It's actually specifically designed for electronic communications. So it does. In order for you to directly market to your customers by text message or email, you need to get their consent.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Does CASL apply to text message marketing, so SMS?
It certainly does.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. Simple yes on that one, guys. So definitely applies to your communication with your customer digitally, right? Despite the medium.
Mm-hmm.
Can we do delivery? So delivery of cannabis in Canada, is that something that's allowed, guys?
So in British Columbia, that's not allowed. You can only sell cannabis from the retail location. You know, the pandemic has changed things slightly where the regulators have been a little bit more lenient. You can do click and collect and curbside pickup. I understand that Ontario is now has or it will be very shortly allowing delivery. I don't know what that looks like. As I mentioned, every province's regulation governing retail sales is different, but I understand that Ontario has either now permitted delivery or is about to. But curbside pickup is available, click and collect is available, however you want to call it. But in BC, there is no delivery.
No, I would maybe just add, I'm not sure if this is what was intended by delivery, but the government can deliver by mail in British Columbia, but that wouldn't apply to private retailers.
Great point there, Stefan. Very interesting one. I want to field one of the questions here from the audience now, just to take a quick break from the questions that we've had submitted prior. One quick moment here. Here's a great question. Are there any daily consumption limits for recreational and medical? And do they vary by province or some across all, or the same across all? So in other words, is there a daily consumption limit for recreational and medical? And is it different from province to province, or is it the standard, if you will, across the entire country?
Yeah, so I can field this one. I guess we should probably distinguish between recreation and medical because they're different regimes. But as far as the recreational regime goes, there is a Canada-wide possession restriction. So I think the question said consumption, and I don't know if the consumption is really regulated. But as far as what you can have with you, you're permitted to possess up to 30 grams of dried cannabis, or the equivalent in non-dried form, whether it's fresh cannabis, liquid product, concentrates, or seeds. And the Cannabis Act has kind of an equivalency table that states that 1 dry gram of cannabis is equivalent to 5 grams of fresh, 15 grams of edibles, 70 grams of a liquid product, a 1/4 gram of concentrates, whether solid or liquid, or 1 cannabis seed.
Oh, so they really broke it down within that regulation. That's great to know. It actually makes it pretty easy, right, to follow if they break it down in those different
it is quite specific
categories.
Yeah.
Very specific. Moving right along here. This is another great one. We get this question quite often. Can we offer daily deals or fire sales?
Yeah, it would be wonderful if you could. And Alon, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that you can offer any daily deals or fire sales on cannabis or related products.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, from the BC perspective, you've got minimum pricing regulations. So you can't sell below the liquor distribution branch wholesale price, or the liquor or the sort of the suggested retail price. So whichever is lower. In British Columbia, it's liquor distribution branch that governs the sale of cannabis. Every province has a different governing body. This happens to be ours. So they do set minimum pricing. In short, what it means is you can only go as low as your wholesale cost. That's it. So there's no fire sales.
Gotcha. So keep that in mind to the audience here, right? No fire sales out there. Can't move a massive amount of products in that fashion. Not allowed. Keep that in mind as you, create your strategy, right, for your business. Can we advertise our deals on social media?
So if by deals you mean pricing, the answer is no. We've already covered that. You can't advertise discounts or blowouts or fire sales, but you can advertise your brand on social media. So if you've got one store or a chain of stores, you can advertise as long as the advertising is in compliance with the Cannabis Act.
There you go. And that was also one of the questions from one of our attendees here today in terms of being able to advertise your business on social media. So as long as you are within compliance, right, no promotions as in discounts or your pricing on social media. Remain compliant when advertising your business, if you will, on social media is the answer.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. Which is pretty powerful advertising. I mean, building brand awareness is really strong, and you don't need to do that by, just advertising your price. For that matter, you look at a lot of the established, successful companies, they don't even advertise their product anymore. Everybody knows what the Nike swoosh means. So if you create a really engaging logo and a brand name and a brand presence to the point where all it takes for you is to constantly put that brand presence in the public's eye, that's pretty powerful stuff.
Wonderful, wonderful. Can we offer an incentive to capture customer information? So I think this goes back to CASL, right? The idea of being able to receive consent from the customer and incentivizing them in some way so that you can retain more customer information, if you will, and grow that business presence.
Well, this is a good question, actually. I think it's sort of nuanced. So you can't hand out product or a discount in exchange for getting their email address and their consent. But what you can do is provide them with other incentive. If you're on our email list, you will be notified as soon as we receive a certain product that you like, or we'll update you with new product as it arrives from time to time, which is an incentive in that, I'm first to know when product hits the shelf. But you can't, there's no trading, right? I can't give you, a 10% discount on your next purchase or a t-shirt or anything like that.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
So you cannot do that. Wonderful. Great answer there. Thank you so much for clarifying that. Certainly some nuances there, right, that you want to abide by. And once again, if you have questions in particular surrounding how to attract customers and remain compliant, right, I certainly encourage you to reach out to the Segev group, get those fine lines, if you will, defined for you so that you can go out there and capture more customers in a compliant manner and avoid potential challenges there.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we compliantly capture customer information, name, phone number, and email? I think we just addressed this one here, right? So you definitely want to follow the regulations. Once again, if you have a specific idea in mind on how you want to promote that business or how you want to entice that prospective customer, right? Certainly, reach out to us, reach out to Segev Group. Will certainly help you navigate those waters. How do we ensure our website is compliant with the Cannabis Act? What pages and pop-ups are needed? This is a pretty good one.
Yeah, for starters, you need the age verification tool before you access the website. Mm-hmm. Once someone confirms that they're over the age of majority and they click on it, you enter into the website. And then the same thing applies with respect to marketing on the website as it does to promoting your product outside the website. So same idea. When I log onto a website, I can't see any advertising that would make me think there's a health benefit, a lifestyle benefit, or anything like that. I can advertise pricing. It's factual in nature. I can advertise product, strain, terpene profile, all that sort of stuff. It seems pretty bland, but it doesn't have to be. You can use imagery from your store, imagery of the product. Beautiful photography still is very engaging. In terms of testimonials, you can include client reviews as long as those reviews have not been paid for. So if you have a sort of a forum on the website and that content is produced by customers and that content has not been paid for, you can include that on your website.
Wonderful, wonderful. I do have a question here from the audience that takes us a little bit backwards in some of the questions that we had earlier, but I think it is important, and it's pertaining to that whole pricing conversation, gentlemen, that we were having a little earlier. You know, we did define that discounting or it's obviously a fine line, right? You cannot sell below wholesale costs. But one of the questions we received here is percentage. Can you advertise like percentage discounts on your products?
Yeah, you can do that in the store, right? So at the point of sale, you can advertise. You can't advertise it outside of the store. So there is that distinction. That's a good question, actually. And
That's a great question.
It's a distinction that needs to be drawn. So when I'm in the store, I can show product is discounted, as long as I'm in compliance with the pricing regulation. And it should also be noted, the pricing regulation that I'm referring to is the British Columbia regulation, and that might differ province to province.
There you go. If you need some further definition on that, this is a great one to engage the Segev group, right, and or foot traffic, so we can help you define those perimeters for how do you engage the customer with discounts, right? That is a really good one and create the differentiation there. So thank you so much, gentlemen, for covering that one again. Well, I think we answered this question here, right? Can a website be deemed a non-compliant? And I think the answer is resounding yes. There are many different ways you can make your website non-compliant, and I think we already addressed this. So be mindful of how you promote, right, the product, the imagery you use to ensure that you are not breaching some of those compliancy issues, right? Whether that is a lifestyle, the actual product, health benefits, things of that nature to ensure that you're not compliant. And then also, once again, right, engage the Segev group if you want to really have a fine-tuned website that one speaks the message, the brand that you want, but remain compliant so you can avoid some challenges there down the line. Is SEO a compliance strategy, and why? So search engine optimization, right? The ability to create more authority within the web world, if you will, for your website through the means of search engine search. Is that something that is compliant? And if so, how do you ensure that strategy is compliant? I think this is a little bit of a challenging question, right? Because website SEO is a combination of many different things. Do you guys have an easy answer for this one?
Yeah, I think there is a fairly easy answer, and that is that search engine optimization is compliant, so long as the way that you're optimizing is otherwise compliant. So say you're providing information on your website, you know, you're building the content so that search engines index it more effectively, and that your website floats to the top of different searches for different content, then yes, that's absolutely a fantastic way to advertise and to remain compliant. So you want to make sure that your copywriting has, you know, all of the keywords that people are looking for, you know, the information that they're searching for, and that's a fantastic way to promote your business and to comply with the regulations at the same time.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for answering that one. So SEO, yes, allowed. It can increase your overall traffic to your website, the authority of your website, but remain compliant in doing so, right? Take the proper steps to ensure that the content you're generating is compliant. And then can we display our menu online and accept pre-orders?
Yeah, you can. So if I log on to the website, you can display the product and that you currently have. You can again show product information, pricing. Can you accept pre-orders? You can, provided that provided that you comply with the ID requirements and point of sale payment requirements. And it differs province to province. In British Columbia, for example, I can complete an order online, but ultimately payment has to be made in store and the ID verification has to be made at the point of sale. So, and that will differ province to province.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting one there for sure, right? Especially since BC allowed the pre-ordering recently since the coronavirus crisis that we're experiencing. Certainly important.
Right. And, you know, and I expect as the industry starts maturing and the regulators understand what works and what doesn't, we're going to see changes in the regulation and how these businesses operate.
Absolutely. And this is interesting too, gentlemen, because, you know, there is the ability obviously to share with the customer specific discounting on a product in store, but what if their online store, right? Is that something that they can do there as well?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. Yeah, Stefan, do you have any thoughts on that?
That is a good question. Yeah. I don't see why not. Yeah, I mean, you're certainly permitted to provide information about the price at the time people are paying, and if there is a means for them to pre-order online, then I don't see why the price couldn't be conveyed.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I think, you know, once I'm on the website or on the online store, I think that's acceptable. I think it would be unacceptable to blast out sales outside of that marketplace.
Yeah, where you're actually placing the order.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, this goes back to yet a few other questions that have been asked here by our audience members throughout the webinar today about taking credit card payment, right? Is credit card payment allowed within Canada, or is it province to province regulated?
Yeah, credit card payment is allowed. There's been lots of discussion on credit card payments, and the reason for, I'll use the word controversy, relating to credit card payments, it has to do with the credit card companies are owned by, they're American owned. Recreational cannabis is not federally lawful in the US. There was lots of concern that credit card transaction information would be available to US federal authorities. And if I'm crossing the border to the States as a customer of a regulated lawful dispensary here, I'm crossing down in the States, federal authorities might have access to my information and I might have issues. So there's some controversy arising out of that. I have never heard of a firsthand account of someone being stopped because they used a Visa or MasterCard up here. But that was some talk that was prevalent about, 6-7 months ago. I haven't heard that since. Having said that, though, a large percentage of purchases are still done in cash, which is not the norm compared to other industries. Maybe it comes from this paranoia. I don't know. I suspect it does.
Very common, right? You hear all the stories of industry dispensary owners, and their cash flow. So yeah. I think we have time for one more question, and then we're going to be summarizing our webinar here today by providing some takeaways. So what are the requirements to accept online pre-orders? I think we've already established this one, so we'll move forward to a next one. Can we accept payments online? The answer to this question is no. It has to be done at the POS locally. And correct me here if I'm wrong, right? That was the
again,
the summary.
so that's correct for British Columbia, but that may differ province to province.
Okay, there you go. So it may
That's
differ province to province. So British Columbia, that is correct. You cannot, but in other locations that could be different. So keep that in mind. Can we advertise using Google Ads?
Yeah, you can. Really similar to our discussion on SEO. As long as it's compliant with the Cannabis Act, you can. If your advertising is in contravention of the Act, then you can't. So it's not so much the medium, it's the message.
Wonderful. So there it is. You can, right? It is the message. So keep that in mind. And that is absolutely an area of expertise here with foot traffic. Just to highlight, foot traffic has been successfully hosting Google advertisement within the cannabis industry, both in the United States as well as in Canada for the last 4.5 years, going on 5 years. You know, varying obviously from state to state, depending on the regulation, both in the US and Canada, but certainly one of the expertise that we bring to the table is how to actually advertise online to get you the presence and attention you need from your customers while remaining compliant. And with that, I do want to share a quick takeaway. I want to thank the team here, Alon and Stefan, for joining us today, so graciously providing us so much information, right? And I want to just highlight one of the ways that you can get in touch with the team is either phone number, email, or navigating to their website. But I want to turn it back over to Segev and Alon and Stefan here for any closing remarks. But I want to thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thanks, thanks, Eduardo. I guess sort of the big picture here is we're in a really new industry here. And because of that, we're still working in an environment that doesn't have a lot of direction. So we don't know yet how the legislation's been interpreted. We don't know how it's been enforced, which is exciting in that we're, first in this market, but at the same time, it does create some challenges. What it means is you've got to be really mindful of the legislation, know what you can and can't do, and take a creative approach to carrying on business, but at the same time being compliant. And as the industry matures, we're more than likely to see how this legislation's been interpreted and enforced, and we will then have greater guidance. But until then, it really is helpful to make sure that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, team, once again for taking the time and sharing some valuable insight with our audience here today. For those of you who are still on the line with us and have attended here today, this webinar is going to be provided also via our website, so feel free to navigate to foottraffic.co/webinars if you want to review some of these questions and answers here. And share this information also with anybody else within the industry that you feel could benefit from it. Please feel free to share that link by navigating there. We'll also follow up with some additional information via email for those that have registered. But thank you once again, Alon and Stefan, for your time. And feel free, once again, everyone on the line, foottraffic.co/webinars. And we look forward to the opportunity to speaking to you again. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Eduardo.
Thank you.